Srimad-Bhagavatam class on Friday, the 25th of June, 2021. So, as ever, we'll start with the chanting of Jai Radha Madhava. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari, Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari, Jaya Gopi Janaballava Girivaradhari, Jaya Gopi Janaballava Girivaradhari, Yashodanandana Braja Jannaranjana, Yashodanandana Braja Jannaranjana, Yamunatira Vanachari, Yamunatira Vanachari, Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari, Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari, Jaya Gopi Janaballava Girivaradhari, Jaya Gopi Janaballava Girivaradhari, Yashodanandana Braja Jannaranjana, Yashodanandana Braja Jannaranjana, Yamunatira Vanachari, Yamunatira Vanachari, Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari, Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari, Jaya Gopi Janaballava Girivaradhari, Jaya Gopi Janaballava Girivaradhari, Yashodanandana Braja Jannaranjana, Yashodanandana Braja Jannaranjana, Yamunatira Vanachari, Yamunatira Vanachari, Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. A reading from Srimad-Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 13, text, Chapter 13, which is Dhritarashtra quits home, and we are on text 56 of 60, so we're 4 more verses left in this chapter. Okay, text 56. Dhvasta-māyā-guṇodarko niruddha-karaṇāśayaḥ nivartitākhilāhāra āste sthāṇur ivācalaḥ tasyāntarāyo maivābhūḥ sannyastākhila-karmaṇaḥ dhvasta-māyā-guṇodarko niruddha-karaṇāśayaḥ nivartitākhilāhāra āste sthāṇur ivācalaḥ tasyāntarāyo maivābhūḥ sannyastākhila-karmaṇaḥ dhvasta-māyā-guṇodarko niruddha-karaṇāśayaḥ nivartitākhilāhāra āste sthāṇur ivācalaḥ tasyāntarāyo maivābhūḥ sannyastākhila-karmaṇaḥ dhvasta-māyā-guṇodarko niruddha-karaṇāśayaḥ nivartitākhilāhāra āste sthāṇur ivācalaḥ tasyāntarāyo maivābhūḥ sannyastākhila-karmaṇaḥ dhvasta, being destroyed, māyā-guṇa, the modes of material nature, udarka, after effects, niruddha, being suspended, karaṇāśayaḥ, the senses and the mind, nivartitākhilāhāra, stopped, akhila, all, āhāra, food for the senses, āste is sitting, sthāṇur, immovable, like, ivācalaḥ, fixed, tasya, his, antārāyo, hindrances, maivābhūḥ, never like that, be, sannyastākhila, renounced, akhila, all sorts, karmaṇaḥ, material duties. Translation. He will have to suspend all the actions of the senses, even from the outside, and will have to be impervious to interactions of the senses which are influenced by the modes of material nature. After renouncing all material duties, he must become immovably established beyond all sources of hindrances on the path. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Dhritarashtra had attained, by the yogic process, the stage of negation of all sorts of material reaction. The effects of the material modes of nature draw the victim to indefatigable desires of enjoying matter. But one can escape such false enjoyment by the yogic process. Every sense is always busy in searching for its food, and thus the conditioned soul is assaulted from all sides and has no chance to become steady in any pursuit. Maharaj Yudhishthira was advised by Narada not to disturb his uncle by attempting to bring him back home. He was now beyond the attraction of anything material. The material modes of nature, the gunas, have their different modes of activities, but above the material modes of nature is the spiritual mode, which is absolute. Nirguna means without reaction. The spiritual mode and its effect are identical. Therefore, the spiritual quality is distinguished from its material counterpart by the word nirguna. After complete suspension of the material modes of nature, one is admitted to the spiritual sphere. An action dictated by the spiritual modes is called devotional service or bhakti. Bhakti is therefore nirguna, attained by direct contact with the Absolute. And just read the translation again. He will have to suspend all the actions of the senses, even from the outside, and will have to be impervious to interactions of the senses, which are influenced by the material modes of nature. After renouncing all material duties, he must become immovably established beyond all sources of hindrances on the path. Om ajana timirandasya gananjana shalakaya chakshur umilitam yena tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Shri Chaitanya manopishtam stapitam yena bhutale swayarupa gadamayam dadati swabadantikam. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaura Bhaktavinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. As ever, the precise use of the English language by Srila Prabhupada. So just when we're reading the purport and we come to words like it would be handy if I got the right purport. Sorry about that. But just reading through it, where Prabhupada says, the effects of the material modes of nature draw the victim to indefatigable desires of enjoying matter. You know, English is obviously my first language, but actually I'm not sure that I ever heard the word indefatigable in my young adult life before I came in contact with Srila Prabhupada's books. But indefatigable means it never becomes tired. So it's a constant drawing of the victim. We're the victim, by the way, us here in the material world, who to varying degrees are on the stage of getting to the point of being in control of our senses. But to whatever degree we're not in control of our senses, then this is applying to us, because the effects of the material modes of nature, goodness, passion, ignorance, and all the interactions between those three, those material modes of nature, they're tireless, they're indefatigable in terms of trying to draw us in to engaging the senses to enjoy matter. And of course, once we allow our senses to be used in that way, for us to be dictated in that way, for them to be engaged in enjoying matter, once we allow that, then that mitigates against our spiritual progress. You can't kind of have one foot in both camps, so to speak. One foot in the material camp, where you're engaging the senses in sense gratification, while simultaneously trying to have one foot in the spiritual camp, which is diametrically opposed to... Opposed is the wrong word, diametrically, because ultimately the goal is for us to be happy. We're all ananda-maya-bhyasat, we're all pleasure-seeking living entities. So the goal is to be happy, but the spiritual happiness, and then the so-called material, Prabhupada would use that phrase a lot, so-called material happiness, because ultimately it's not happiness, it's actually suffering, that in the beginning may appear or come across as being pleasurable, but in a very short space of time manifests itself as being the exact opposite. So you know, this thing of having, you know, trying to have, it doesn't work, you know. If you want that real, genuine, lasting, ever-growing happiness, that the spiritual energy and us engaging with that spiritual energy gives us, awards us, then we have to do essentially what Dhritarashtra is doing here in separating himself from his senses, his material senses, or if you like, purifying the material senses so they're actually engaged in a spiritual activity like that. But the challenge is that the material modes of nature are indefatigable. They are tireless, relentless in trying to always attract us back to engaging in the material senses. And we'll talk a little bit about that in terms of they may be indefatigable in trying to draw us back in, but we can get to the stage where they have no effect on us whatsoever, like that. So anyway, indefatigable, that was one word, and then you know, every sense is always busy searching for its food, and we'll talk about that a little bit too. And thus the conditioned soul is assaulted. Now, of course, assaulted is a word we're very familiar with, But, it's just interesting, the conditioned soul, us, we're assaulted from all sides, front, back, sideways, up, top, bottom, etc. And that makes it very difficult to become steady in our pursuit of spiritual life, of devotional service. And then I thought I saw one more word that really jumped out at me in the purport. Maybe not, maybe it was in the translation. So we'll go to the translation also then. He will have to suspend all the actions of the senses, even from the outside, and will have to be impervious. Impervious, loving these words. So impervious is meaning untouched by, impregnable, watertight. Or if any of you have ever been in the catering industry, hermetically sealed. That's another word for impervious. So basically what it means is that it's impossible to affect you or to touch you or for one to be affected by it like that. You're impervious. So in this context, it's saying that we'll have to be impervious to the interactions of the senses. So we have to make sure that we make it impregnable for that to happen. Like we're watertight, we're hermetically sealed, and we cannot be affected by the interaction of those senses. And then it goes on to say, which are influenced by the material modes of nature. After renouncing all material duties, he, meaning Dhritarashtra, must become immovably established beyond all sources of hindrance on the path. So again, this indefatigable aspect of the material modes of nature, and they're relentlessly trying to draw us in, the modes of nature to draw us in to engaging in our senses. But what we must become is immovably established. Immovably, very simple to understand. You don't move, you don't shift, no matter what these assaults are from either side, from top, bottom, back, front, whatever the assaults are, that they don't affect us. We don't get buffeted, like in the wind. You see trees and they're getting buffeted from side to side. Sometimes the winds are so strong they'll even break like that. But no, as Prabhupada said about a candle, just as a candle is blown in the wind, that we have to become unaffected by those changes like that. So we become immovably established, and hindrances, on the path of spiritual progress, that there are none. There are ultimately, if we're fixed in our service and fixed in our position, and we're dridhavat, we're determined in the pursuit of spiritual life, then there are no obstacles or hindrances on that path like that. So that's the stage that we've got to come to, that we're not just so easily blown away or blown off the path of devotional service, of spiritual activity like that. And we talked, I think, the last time I spoke, nice verse in the Nectar of Instruction, very first verse actually, Vacho Vegam, Manasa Kroda Vegam, that when we get to this point of controlling the senses, and the control of the senses starts with the one that I'm using this morning, the tongue. And if we can control the tongue, then that's it. That's the root of controlling all of our other senses. And the two main ways that we control the tongue are by what we speak. So I'm speaking now. It's very hard not to speak. Of course, some people do take a mona vrat, a vow of silence like that. And while their intentions for doing that may be very good, ultimately, Srila Prabhupada, he said it was, it was misguided, because we don't need to stop using our tongue or stop speaking, but we just need to ensure that whenever we do speak, we're speaking in glorification of Krishna, or we're speaking, explaining Krishna conscious philosophy like that. And if we're using our tongue for that purpose, then that's far better than taking a vow of silence. That again is engaging it positively in spiritual activity. And then the other use of the tongue that we're very familiar with, because we use it every day. Well, we use it every day for speaking, of course, but we use it also every day for eating. So the way that we engage our tongue for eating in spiritual pursuit is by always eating food that has been one that is to the liking of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and two, is then offered prior to us actually eating it. It's offered to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So then it's a spiritual activity like that. It becomes spiritual. And again, just like speaking about Krishna rather than taking a vow of silence, because also people fast, don't they? But rather than doing that, that's not required. We can actually feast. Prabhupada used to say that, like every day is a feast. Of course, there are certain special days where we fast to honor certain personalities, but in general, every day is a feast. And even better than fasting is actually honoring or taking food that has been transformed from what's known as bhoga, or material enjoyment in essence is what the word bhoga means, and is transformed into prasadam, which means the mercy of the Lord. So then our eating becomes a spiritual activity, and rather than just not eating and negating the tongue, if you like, we don't just negate it, we actually use it in the service of the Lord. So we always speak about the Lord, speak about the glories of Krishna, explaining Krishna conscious philosophy to those who are not familiar with it or don't know much about it, etc. And then we always make sure that whatever we consume in terms of sustaining the body, that it is foodstuff that Krishna has requested, and then we also offer it to Krishna as an offering, and then we transform it from just being a material thing, bhoga, to being a spiritual thing. So then another thing that caught me in the translation and the purport today was that every sense is always busy in searching for its food. Now, that can be taken literally, I think, as each of our five gross senses to have a varying connection, I guess, to food. But I think food in this context also can be taken generally, in a general sense, to mean what each of our senses is demanding. And we've talked about this also in the recent past. So we have five gross senses, as we know, and the first one is the sense of smell. So, that's directly related to food. You can smell food. It's also one of the aspects of what makes food appealing to us, actually, if it smells pleasant and smells nice like that. And that again goes back to the point about only eating foodstuffs that Krishna advises us to eat. I remember the first time ever as a young person, but anyway, being stuck behind one of those lorries, big lorries, that is carrying what they call the offal from the factories, the meat factories, the slaughterhouses, the abattoirs like that, on a road. And I'm in a car, and we can't pass. It's a country road, you can't kind of pass the truck, and you're stuck right behind it. The smell that emanates from those trucks, it's the most appalling smell. I really couldn't think of a worse smell, the smell of dead and rotting flesh like that. So, who wants to eat that? It's horrible, certainly Krishna doesn't want to eat it, even if some of us are the modes of nature, they're infatigable assault and trying to, trick us into all sorts of things that we think will make us happy. They may somehow or another like that, but it's just awful. It's absolutely atrocious. The smell is atrocious like that. Anyway, so smell is connected to food, definitely. Although not just food. We can smell, flowers or nice scents, etc. That from nature generally, of course. So the smell has an additional connection to food like that. And then the next one is taste, and of course taste is directly related to food. Arguably almost exclusively. Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, "I'm the taste in water," but of course water also has liquid food like that. So the first two senses then, smell and taste, are directly connected like that to food, almost exclusively, although not entirely. And then the next one is sight, our ability to see. And again, you have a connection in one sense to food. I remember my son telling me that in relation to our Govinda's restaurants, you know, and when social media started to really become a big thing, whenever that was, a decade ago, I can't actually remember. But I just remember him telling me that, you know, you've really got to get pictures of all the wonderful Govinda preparations that we do. You've got to get them out there because people eat with their eyes. You know, so people will definitely do that. They'll be attracted by nicely presented, which is something, as a general rule, ironically enough, in the context of the restaurant industry, something that we always, as devotees, could improve on. Actually, it's one thing that the non-devotees and the regular restaurateurs are very good at. They're very good at, you know, presenting stuff like that. But anyway, so people eat with their eyes. So there's, with sight also, there's a connection to food to some degree. But of course, it's a relatively small connection, that one, because there's so many other things that we see that are not related to food like that. The next one is touch. You know, I certainly inside the mouth, I guess you're touching the food like that, but generally you wouldn't associate that sense with food. But going back to the point that Prabhupada's making in the purport, that every sense is always busy and searching for its food. So in the context of touch, that's very much associated with sexual activity and sex life, and the attraction that there is between living entities of the sense of touch like that. So in the context of that sense searching after its food, it's not looking for, you know, I don't know, a sabji or a samosa. You know, the sense of touch isn't really looking for that. It's looking for that kind of association of touch between the sexes, etc. And it's always searching for that. These senses are always searching for what turns them on, for want of a better phrase. And then, of course, you have sound. And sound is very interesting. Again, has no connection, essentially no connection with food. But sound's a very interesting one. We like listening to things. You know, music obviously is a very common one. But we also like listening to our own voices like that. Whereas the perfection of sound is when we use it, again, going back to the point about the tongue, when we use it to glorify Krishna, to glorify the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And of course, the best way that we can do that in this age is by chanting the Maha Mantra, the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. And of course, that's all sound related as well. And we talked before about the different gross elements, and the most subtle of them being sound or hearing. And that's connected to ether, and you know what, and the ether, that is the most subtle of the material elements, and the one that's closest to the spiritual realm like that. And so therefore, between ether and sound, the connection between the material element and the material sense of sound, and the material element of ether, it's just interesting. It's the most subtle of them, and it's the form of meditation that we engage in, sound meditation, mantra meditation like that. So again, just going back to food, to finish off on that, and Krishna tells us in the Bhagavad Gita, patram pushpam palam toyam yo me bhakja priyachati, that if one offers me with love and devotion a leaf, a flower, a fruit and water, I will accept it. So Krishna's clarifying those 2 points that I made, not clarifying, he's establishing, if you like, those 2 points that I made earlier, that we both choose the right foodstuffs. So Krishna's saying here, a leaf, a flower, fruit, water, etc. We choose the right foodstuffs to eat, and then before eating them, we first offer them to Krishna. Krishna's saying, I will accept it. If you offer these things, I will accept them. And then that transforms them from a material thing, bhoga, into prasadam like that. And it's that simplicity and ease of access, if you like, to achieving spiritual perfection that's such a unique boon for us, actually, since the appearance of Lord Chaitanya. That ultimately, that's what we do. We just engage our tongue in speaking and glorifying Krishna and honouring Krishna Prasad. And by just doing those 2 activities, we can achieve spiritual perfection. If we're looking here at Dhritarashtra, you know, his was a far more difficult route that he took in trying to achieve perfection like that. But for us, as we have that special boon since the appearance of Lord Chaitanya 530 years ago, that special boon really, that we can achieve all of that. Of course, there's a little more to it. Not a little more to it, but it's described that there are 9 stages of devotional service. But again, we can achieve those 9 stages and pass through those 9 stages of devotional service essentially with that simple principle of just engaging the tongue in Krishna service in the 2 ways that we've described. But anyway, the 9 stages. The first one is Shraddha, and Shraddha simply means faith, that we have a little faith. Faith, it's kind of an interesting thing, and it's the type of thing that we can easily take for want of a better word, a gamble on. In other words, how do people in the material world, how are they doing so many things that they do every single day of the week? Why do people buy televisions, as an example? Because they have faith that they're going to get some apparent enjoyment from watching whatever is on the television. And that just goes for so many things that people do in the material world, It's like people jump in cars and they're driving down motorways, 60, 70, 80, whatever it is, miles an hour. And why do they do that? Or what? They'll do that while they're, chatting with somebody else in the car or listening to the radio or whatever it may be. So they're completely relaxed in that environment. We can't run 80 miles an hour. If we did, we'd win the Olympics every single time. We can't do that, So in that sense, for a human being to be zooming along a motorway at 80 miles an hour, whatever the case may be, we have great faith that if needed, when needed, and also if needed in an emergency, that we can stop this thing that's hurtling down at 80 miles an hour, that, as the police will describe, is a lethal weapon, actually, if you lose control of it or whatever the case may be. So we have great faith that we just push our foot on this pedal and the car will stop like that. Now, of course, once we've done that, then obviously we have faith because we've got the experience of it. But there's always a first time for these things. The first time we get in a car, but we still have that faith. We have that leap of faith that this will work, this will happen. So faith is an interesting thing because it implies you have to trust somebody else. But why not? Why not take that, just like we did with the car? We got in the first time and had faith that we put our foot on the brake and it will stop. Let's take that first step to have faith in the process of Krishna consciousness. Then if it doesn't deliver, okay, nothing ventured, nothing gained. And if it doesn't deliver, we just say, okay, I'm not going to engage with that again or use that again like that. But certainly it makes sense to, quote unquote, give it a go like that. So the first step, or the first stage in the process of Krishna consciousness is to have a little faith, that this process can actually work like that. And then once we do that, the next stage is that we will associate, sadhu sangha, we will associate with like-minded people who are on that spiritual path. We will associate with them. And that's also natural, very natural in the material world, that, the phrase used is birds of a feather flock together. So you will have, I don't know, let me think of an example, football fans like that, So if you follow, Manchester United or whatever the case may be, the tendency is that you will find yourself associating with Manchester United fans like that. So in the same way, if you're interested in spiritual activity, in spiritual life, it's natural that you will be inclined towards associating with people who are like-minded. And of course, when you do that, some of those people, at least, if not all of them, will be further along that path than we will be. Or there will always be people like that are further along the path, the spiritual path. So that increases and helps to increase our faith. We can see, the effect that the process is having on them, and the benefits that the process is having on them. So that further strengthens and builds our own faith like that. And then once we're associating with like-minded people, then just as with Manchester United fans, it will be going to see a football match. That will be the activity that flows from that association. So the activity that flows from the association of sadhus or saintly persons or devotees like that is bhajana kriya, devotional practices. So if you associate with a group of sadhus, you can rest assured that they won't be bringing you to a football match like that. But they'll be engaged in activities like this, discussing Krishna conscious philosophy, discussing the pastimes of Krishna, engaging in the chanting of the Hare Krishna mantra like that. So by that association, you engage in those devotional practices. And then by doing those first three things, having that faith, and Prabhupada often says, if we take one step towards Krishna, he will take 100 steps towards us. So he will help us in this process. So just having that faith, associating with spiritual personalities or like-minded sadhus, devotees, engaging in devotional practices, all of these things start to directly impact then on what we're reading today in today's verse and purport about the indefatigable modes of nature trying to assault us from all sides, assault our senses and try to get us to engage those senses in material activity. So where does that come from? That comes from an intricate set of desires that are rooted in our heart. Desire for material life and material activity and engaging the senses. So all of these all of these passions, for want of a better word, that they're residing in the heart. And they're typical ones that we're very familiar with, are like lust, anger, greed, envy, all of those kind of qualities that our senses are connected to and pushing us to satisfy like that. So by engaging in these 9 stages of devotional life, and as we progress through them, the next one after bhajana kriya or devotional activities is known as anartana vritti. And anartana vritti, very interesting. Actually, there's different translations for those words. As ever, there's always, kind of varying different words that more or less the same, but give a slightly different emphasis on that type of thing. So one description is that they are, well, first off, lust, anger, greed, envy, all these qualities, they're unwanted things. They're there, but we don't want them. We don't want to be lusty, just lusting after, something material and using it just to enjoy ourselves. We certainly don't want to be angry, but of course, so many times we become angry, and it's something that we find very difficult to control. Lust, anger, greed, we don't want to be greedy, but again, there's this compulsion for us to try to accumulate more things. Envy, even worse again, envy, such a horrible, negative material emotion, leads to so many nasty things. People kill people on the basis of envy, etc. So they're unwanted things. We don't actually want them. So that's part of the translation of an anartana vritti. And the other half is, that we get rid of the unwanted things, but nice words that are used, like vanishing. This process helps to vanish them, get them to disappear, uproot them from our hearts, so they're totally uprooted and will never come back, and we can discard them. So you have, shraddha, sadhu sangha, association with like-minded people, bhajana kriya, devotional activities, and then anartana vritti. That's like a whole process is taking place, cleansing the heart and uprooting those unwanted things from the heart. And when we achieve that, we come to the stage of nishtha, or steadiness. We become steady in our practice. So this point about the indefatigable material modes of nature trying to drag us into the network of sense gratification or engaging our senses in enjoyment. When we get beyond the anartana vritti stage to the nishtha stage, the steady stage, then we can't be buffeted by those indefatigable modes of nature. We're effectively in control. Yes, it's not that we haven't reached perfection yet, and we could still actually go in reverse gear, but we are now in a very powerful place when we've reached the stage of nishtha or steadiness. And then very soon after that, the next stage is ruchi, or taste. We actually start to get a real taste for spiritual activity and spiritual life. We're really enjoying what we're doing on the spiritual platform, which is such a powerful thing, because if we don't have that taste, we need it. Ultimately, we need it because we are as I said earlier, Anandamaya Abhyasa, we're eternally pleasure-seeking living entities. So we're seeking pleasure. So once we find that pleasure on the spiritual platform, and it's a pleasure that's really attractive to us, we have a real taste for it, then we've no interest anymore in the tastes that the material world has to offer. But if we don't have any spiritual taste, then obviously that material taste is becoming more attractive, because in the absence of any other taste, then even though it's a lesser taste, it will become to some degree attractive like that. Prabhupada gives the example of, if you're in prison, I'm sure it's different these days in Western prisons that people get fed quite well, but anyway, there is that sense of prisons in the past, if you like, and maybe in other parts of the world, where, people may get... Actually, I remember reading a book about about devotees in Russia who were put in prison just for being Hare Krishna devotees. They hadn't committed any crime. In fact, they were engaged in the best activity you could possibly ever engage in, yet for material reasons and political reasons, that they were put in jail. But their food that they would get there would be water and salted bread, just bread with salt in, and that's what they would have to sustain themselves on. Now, if that's all that you have to eat, then you will eat it, and to some degree you'll enjoy it, because it's all you've got. But then Prabhupada would give the example, if you come to a Hare Krishna temple, you get a beautiful feast with beautiful, beautiful sabjis and savouries and sweets and all sorts of beautiful preparations, tasty preparations, that then you lose your taste for the salted bread. You're no longer attracted to that. Not that you're really attracted to it in the first place, but it was sustaining you and there was some enjoyment there. But you completely lose any interest in the salted bread when you've got something so much nicer to participate in or to eat. So it's the same way. If you have some spiritual taste, some ruchi, some spiritual taste, then the material things that were giving you some kind of pleasure before, they become unattractive, and you just have no interest in them anymore like that. So that's ruchi. You have some taste of spiritual life, and then that very quickly develops into what's known as a shakti, or genuine attachment for the Lord, for the Supreme Personality of Godhead. You actually have attachment, just like you have attachment to family members now. That natural attachment, and Prabhupada explains how the love that a mother has for a child is the closest thing to spiritual love, because it's unconditional. The mother literally would do anything for the child. So when you get that same attachment that a mother has for a child, you have that attachment for the Lord, for Lord Krishna. Such a powerful thing. So starts with getting rid of all the unwanted things, anartana vritti, or having them vanish, disappear. And then we become steady. From that steadiness we get a taste, start getting a taste for spiritual life. From the taste comes real attachment for Krishna, like that. Then bhava develops, or genuine ecstatic emotions. These are, in one sense, we're talking about kind of lofty things here. And it is very important that we understand that that's why Prabhupada describes it as genuine ecstatic emotions. Because the worst thing of all is to have ecstatic emotions that aren't genuine, that are just, artificial. That much better that you don't have any at all than have that. So we need to be, we need to understand that and not take things cheaply and convince ourselves or pretend that we've reached these stages of devotion. But anyway, after attachment to the Lord comes bhav, or genuine spiritual emotions, ecstatic emotions like that. And then the final stage, the ninth stage, is what's known as prema, or pure love for the Supreme Person. It's not just attachment anymore. It's not just emotions anymore. Now it's pure love for the Supreme Personality of Godhead, for Krishna. But ultimately, all of these stages can be achieved by just engaging our tongue in Krishna's service. So always talking about Krishna, Krishna philosophy, and always on eating food that is on Krishna's menu and is then offered to Krishna and transforms from bhoga to prasadam. And then once we do that, every single day of our lives, just commit to doing those two things, we will quickly progress through those 9 stages of devotional service, and we won't have to go and do everything that Dhritarashtra was doing here, and all sorts of, far more austere yogic processes and yogic activities that he was engaged in. So we can kind of see here how everything is so well structured, and it's based on science, or I guess I should say spiritual science, as Prabhupada called it. Nothing is whimsical or concocted or is influenced by speculation or superstition, and that's so much the case in our modern day society. We see, particularly in the area of metaphysics or quasi spiritual life or spiritual activity, it's so much based on that, on speculation, superstition, like that, and people are thinking what's spiritual and trying to figure out themselves, like that. But no, it's a very simple process, a very simple but very, very deliberate scientific process, the process of Krishna consciousness. And unless we engage, for instance, our tongue, as we've just been talking about and describing, in the way that we've been talking and describing, we can't progress in spiritual life. We can come up with some other concocted idea, but it's not going to bring us the success that we need, the success that we crave, becoming free of the material senses like that, and the attractions, the indefatigable attractions that are being generated by the material modes of nature, and trying to engage our senses in that way. But it's important that we do follow a structured process. I read recently something from the wonderful devotee in our tradition, in our parampara, just going back a few stages actually, basically Srila Prabhupada's grandfather, Guru, because he was the father of Srila Prabhupada's spiritual master, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, and that was Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, who's kind of known as the modern day, Prabhupada brought the movement to the Western world. It's kind of understood how Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur was the one who really reinvigorated the Hare Krishna movement after Lord Chaitanya had left, because shortly after, maybe 100 years or so after Lord Chaitanya left, so that would be sort of 400 years or so ago, a little more than 400 years, so Lord Chaitanya was here for 520 odd years ago, maybe 30 years ago now, 530 years ago. He lived for 48 years, and then roughly 100 years after that, so 150 years, anyway, we won't get into too much detail, but 100 years after he left, his message has become actually very similar to what we were just talking about ecstatic emotions, and this is a serious thing. We shouldn't take those cheaply or try to imitate those. So that's what was happening. People were taking the whole process very cheaply. They were imitating that, and they really corrupted actually the whole message of Lord Chaitanya, which of course Lord Chaitanya's message was to achieve pure love of Godhead, but you have to achieve it on a genuine basis, on a real basis of being free from all material desire. So people after Lord Chaitanya, they kind of corrupted that process, and they were taking it cheaply, etc. So Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, 300 years after that, had become corrupted when he came to 250, 300 years, that type of time frame. He really resurrected the whole process, genuine process that was brought by Lord Chaitanya, and then that directly then handed that over to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, who was Srila Prabhupada's direct spiritual master. And then of course Srila Prabhupada was the one that came to the West, and hence we're all here now talking about Krishna and Krishna consciousness. So he was writing about, to be controlled by superstition creates many problems, because from superstition arises prejudice. That's where prejudice comes from. So obviously the whole essence of Krishna consciousness is there is no prejudice, because on the spiritual platform we're all equal like that. So prejudice is only coming from the material platform, if you like, in the material world. But if we base things on superstition and not on genuine spiritual science, that's where prejudice starts. That's where it kind of arises from, and ultimately there's no respect for truth, and therefore he went on to say that wearing the markings, as I am here now in front of you, the tilak and the devotional dress, wearing the markings and the signs of a Vaishnava is one of the methods for cultivating devotion, involving the body. And let's be very clear, Srila Prabhupada wanted that. He wanted his devotees, as far as possible, to dress like Vaishnavas and Vaishnavis, because, not least because that's a way of people being attracted, at least inquiring, because seeing people in the Western world dressed like this isn't such a common thing. So when people see you, probably get the example of a policeman also, that when people see a policeman, if they want to inquire for directions or for something else, whatever it might be, help or whatever it might be, that once they see the police uniform, they'll know to go and out because they can see that it's a policeman. So likewise for devotees, if they see people as devotees, they will either inquire, well, who are you, what are you, if they don't know, or if they already have some inkling or some knowledge like that, they'll then know they can go and ask you about Krishna, just like you can ask the policeman for help or ask the policeman for something else like that. Then if they see devotees, they can... So the wearing of the Vaishnav dress, Prabhupada did put emphasis on it, and it is a way of cultivating devotional life, particularly as it relates to the external body. However, Bhaktivinoda Thakur goes on to say, but to think that is the distinguishing characteristic of a Vaishnav, that's superstition that's arising. I think the phrase he used is that superstition arising from sampradaya prejudice. So in other words, while it's very good that people wear Vaishnav dress and has very positives, we can't think it's the be-all and end-all. It's because it's not, because it's just an external dress. And if we do think it's the be-all and end-all, then as Bhaktivinoda Thakur said, it's kind of superstition or prejudice arising out of sampradaya, bias, if you like, so something like that. So then he goes on to say that controlled or influenced by those beliefs like that, then a person may fall into the trap of rejecting a genuine Vaishnav who isn't wearing the externals like that. Ultimately, the whole thing is internal, what's in the hearts of living entities. So somebody may internally, be a genuine devotee, a very advanced devotee. But if we think that, well, they can't be because they don't have the external dress on, and we reject them or whatever, offend them like that, then that's a real big problem. And then, of course, if that's our mentality, just like we talked earlier about the process of having faith in Krishna consciousness, then you associate with like-minded people, because everyone does that. They have a tendency to gravitate towards associating, with like-minded people. We'll associate with other like-minded people who have those prejudices like that. It becomes really problematic. Then we're associating with other people who have that very narrow, kind of sectarian. It kind of gets into a whole sectarian view then. And then Bhaktivinoda Thakur links that with the Varnashram system. And that's so interesting. He talks about he talks about that prejudice and that group think that everything has to be done in a certain way, and then links it to the Varnashram system and people becoming overly obsessed in the externals and the rituals, if you like, and the externals of the process without actually understanding the essence. And that's such an incredible thing, because in Lord Chaitanya's own life, when he came just to spread the chanting of Hare Krishna. And the Brahmins at that time in India, in West Bengal, they saw this as, as kind of offensive, and whatever. And they saw it as sentimental, just chanting, no, you've got to do this ritual, that ritual, you've got to, and they're known as smarta Brahmins, and basically the word smarta is meaning people who are just fixated on rules and regulations like that. And Lord Chaitanya completely dismissed all of that and told them, no, this is all bogus. The essence is developing love for Krishna, and the best way to do that is by glorifying him through the chanting of his holy names. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur was making a similar point, that people who who are just bound to that Varnashram system become more and more prejudiced, and they fail to develop a higher taste and fail to develop higher levels of bhakti. And also what tends to come with that is not just prejudice, but hatred can come from that, which degrades people even more. And you just get into a whole sectarian framework. So it's just kind of an interesting thing that on one level, we don't dismiss externals like Vaishnava dress, and we also don't dismiss, important ritualistic activities like that, but we cannot see them as the be-all and end-all, because they are not the be-all and end-all. They're just meant as props or assets or things to assist us in our devotional journey. We can't become fixated on them as being everything like that, and then dismiss other people who don't fit into our kind of narrow stereotype of what being a devotee is. Okay, I think I've gone on a little longer than I should actually, almost an hour. So for all of you who have stayed with me for the 55-56 minutes, thank you very much. And just to quickly recap, the whole goal here is to transfer ourselves from material consciousness to spiritual consciousness. As we see with Dhritarashtra 5,000 years ago, he went through a very austere and difficult process of achieving that, extracting himself from material life and bringing himself into spiritual consciousness and into the spiritual realm. But Lord Chaitanya made that so much easier 500 years ago, essentially telling us just chant, dance and feast. Chant, dance and feast. Prabhupada told us that there are three things we have to do. Chant Hare Krishna. That generally leads to some dancing, particularly if you're in the association of others. And then you get tired or hungry, and then you feast, but you feast on Krishna Prasadam. That engages the tongue is engaged in the chanting of the Hare Krishna mantra, then it's engaged in feasting on Krishna Prasadam. And then we can very quickly go through those 9 stages of devotional life and achieve perfection. It's being basically made very, very easy for us, certainly in comparison to bygone ages. So we're all just encouraged to engage in that process of chanting and honouring Prasad on a daily basis. Thank you all very much. Hare Krishna. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada.